we're going to install this precision bandsaw fence on my Delta bandsaw. It's made by Kreg. I bought it from Amazon, and with Prime it came the next day. They sent it directly in the box that it was packaged in, except they just wrapped it like crazy with packing tape. What we're going to do in this video is unbox it, set it up, and then give it a little test run. Right now my bandsaw doesn't have a fence on it, so we're going to start by looking at that. This is my current setup whenever I need to have a fence on the bandsaw. I've had a couple of different setups like this. I had a custom-made plywood fence that it just got worn out, and I had cut into it a couple times, so I threw it away. And now, whenever I need one, I usually just grab any scrap of wood. 2 clamps, set it up, and the big problem with this, it works great, it'll do what you want it to do, but there's really, you can't repeat the accuracy. Every time, if you have to take it off and put it back on, you have to basically start from the beginning, reset it up, and you never get to have the same dimension twice. The reason I picked this fence versus any other fence that's available is that it was designed in part by Mark Duginske. Mark Duginske is basically a power tool expert. He has 2 books that really directly relate to bandsaws and how to use bandsaws. One of them is called Mastering Woodworking Machines. The other one is the Band Saw Handbook. Pretty much he goes in great detail to explain how a bandsaw fence works. A bandsaw isn't the same as a table saw. When you set it up, you just can't have a dimension between the fence and the blade and get a good part out of the saw. The first step in the instruction manual is to mount the guide rail on the saw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over there and size it up to the saw and see what's the situation. In the hardware kit, there's a small packet with the screws that you use to mount the guide rail on the fence, or on the saw table. They're either a metric version or a English version. Okay, so these are working perfectly. It says on the instructions for the Delta saw that you're going to be using a 1/4 28, which is a standard 1/4 inch bolt, but it has a fine thread. So we'll put those aside. I already checked the hole pattern lined up. So I didn't have to drill holes in this guide rail. I have the guide rail snug to the table. Now we have to adjust for the position on the height. The specification is the depth of the miter gauge slot plus 1/16 of an inch. And what I try to do when I was snugging these bolts up is I have it tight enough so that it'll move, but not, but also it's not so loose that when I set it somewhere, it'll just automatically fall back down. And the other thing that's important, you want to make sure you're just using this combination square as a guide. You don't want to put it on there and push, because you could change the measurement that you have it set up at. And see, I'm not tight enough on this bolt right here because everything's falling back down, so I'm going to give it a little bit. There we go. Now that I have it tight, before I give it its final tightening, I want to make sure that nothing moved. What you're looking for here is you want this surface to be parallel to the table and below the bottom of the miter gauge slot. I'll do the final tightening and then check it one more time. The fence bracket is the next thing that goes on the clamp block. And they didn't say it, but a nut driver works much better on something like this than a wrench. I could see you could use a wrench for the final tightening, but versus having to turn it like this edge all the way down. So even finger tightening is not as fast as the nut driver. So, parts fit together great. And the black anodized finish on the aluminum is just perfect. Very nice. Alright, we're going to install the clamping block on the rail. And here's where those nylon feet come in handy. And I'm just feeling for wobbles. Once it stops wobbling, I think I have everything where I like it. Good. And it slides very smooth. And it does not take a lot to lock it in position. That would be one thing that I would be really careful of, would be over tightening it. There's no reason to clamp it like crazy. Just a little bit better than hand tight will be more than enough to hold it in position while you're working. Okay, in order to install the fence on the clamping block, the hex bolts go in a slot, and this is an extruded aluminum fence. I put them in position. Now you can adjust it in any position that you want. The great feature of the fence, these slide, so you can position this for cutoff work with a miter gauge. Now I'll show you how that works. The other cool feature about it is you can change the orientation of the fence. So you have a low fence. To use as well. It's very versatile. And I'm impressed with the way everything fits together. Important feature of these nylon feet, not only do they help the way everything's rubbing together, the other thing is they keep the extruded fence parallel to the blade. So if your blade is square and you put this square against your fence and there's a gap, you adjust the nylon leveling feet to bring the blade parallel, the fence parallel to the blade. And that's an important feature. I didn't realize that. I missed it when I read the instruction manual and I was looking at it again for something else, and I saw it. I said, wow, that's a big deal. Very cool. This fence includes a measuring system, a tape that goes on the guide rail. They tell you in the instructions how to set it up. I made the adjusting bracket so that the fence was perpendicular to the table, and I locked it down. And then I put the cursor here that's adjustable in a neutral position. Let's slide this fence out of the way and take a look at it. Okay, yeah. It won't show up on the video, but I can clearly see where I'm going. You want to be pretty accurate when you put this on because they only go on once. On my table saw fence, I use this just the same as I would use a tape measure. On this fence, I don't think that I'm going to be able to use it that way, but it won't hurt to have it for reference. The saw's all set up with the fence. We're ready to do a cut. What I did was I adjusted everything and then I used test cuts to make sure it was cutting accurately. What we're going to cut is, these are leftovers from the rafters on the building, and we're going to make parts for the gable trim out of these leftovers. What we have here is a little sawtooth piece of detail that's going to go on the gable trim. I've got it traced out, but you can see you want to reduce the thickness, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to resaw this down using our new fence. So this thickness is 1.5 inches. We're going to reduce it to just over 1 inch. Right off of the saw, this cut's going to join another board. It's close enough, but I like to finish it up on the joiner just to make sure that it's nice and smooth. Here's the gable trim laying on the floor of the workshop. I just kind of have it mocked up here so we can get an indication of where we're going. These are the teeth that I was making. They're going to be attached to the board. It's just gingerbread trim, so they're only for decoration. And you can see this is what we started with, and these were the end cuts of the rafters when I made the building. Overall, I'm real happy with the fence that I put on the bandsaw. I was able to take this otherwise scrap piece of wood that fell off of a rafter cut and turn it into this piece of molding decoration using just the bandsaw. I would like to say about the purchase that it was great. I should have bought this 5 years ago. I just kept putting it off, and if you worry about money on something like this, it'll pay for itself just in the way I was able to transform this scrap wood. I liked everything about it. Thank you.